Good Saturday morning, everyone. How's it going? Got some playoff football coming up today, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Hope you have fun watching it, but we got to talk about some Seahawks stuff. And I did this last year. I felt like it went really well. I felt like it was a good way to talk about the offseason. I felt like it was a productive way to go through the decisions the Seahawks are about to face and the decisions that I feel like they should make. So, we're bringing it back for 2022. How much to keep? So, we're going to go through assorted players on the Seahawks who are outgoing free agents, and we're going to try to make some educated guesses on how much it's going to cost to keep that player as a Seahawk, what kind of contract you're going to have to offer up. We're going to also say whether or not we think the team should be willing to do that. So I'll give my thoughts at the end of the video, and you can give your thoughts down in the comments. And obviously, as the offseason goes along, we'll find out if we were close, if we were spot on, if we were way off, if we were a good deal off. But we're going to try to use the information that we have to try to guess what some of these players are going to be worth. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about in this series are things that we went over in the Hawks Nest stream yesterday, or excuse me, 2 days ago. So if you watch that stream, you've already seen some of this, but we're going to go a little deeper into it. And in the process of doing so, we may end up coming to a slightly modified conclusion, because we're going to be doing a deep dive into similar players and similar contracts to try to get an idea of what it might end up being. So I figure we're going to make a couple passes through the roster. We're going to start with the high profile players who might actually get a pretty big bag. And then we're going to go through with the more mid-level players or the lower mid-level players who are going to get paid a little bit, but not that much. And they could easily slip through the cracks and get very little. And then at the very end, we'll probably do a quick wrap up of the guys at the bottom who are going to be making minimum money plus if they're lucky. But going through the roster this first time, we're going to start on the offense. No high-profile quarterbacks are outgoing. No high-profile running backs, at least not a running back who's going to get a fat bag, I don't think. No receivers. So we're going to go ahead and start at the tight end spot with Gerald Everett. He's going to be our first one. And once we establish the rhythm here, we're going to continue to do this with our other outgoing free agents in 2022. Okay, so Gerald Everett came to the Seahawks last year from the Rams, came along with Shane Waldron, signed a 1-year, $6 million deal. That includes some dead money in 2022, by the way, but it doesn't really matter for our purposes. 1 year, $6 million. He is going to turn 28 before the start of the next season, so he's still fairly young. I'm not worried about age yet. And if you look at what he did to earn that $1 million contract, you can see that he had 2 back-to-back seasons where he had around 40 catches for 400 yards and a touchdown or two. And in 2021, with his 1 year, $6 million contract, he did have a career year. Not by a lot, but he almost had 50 catches, 500 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Almost the 50, 500, 5 club. Now keep in mind, he missed 2 games because of COVID. If it was an injury, then that would just kind of be what it is. But COVID, that's kind of a weird, fluky thing that you're not going to see going forward. And he had to play 3.5 games with a backup quarterback. And he had to play a bunch of games with a starting quarterback who had a bad finger, which was making him crazy inaccurate. If Everett had played every game, if Wilson had never gotten hurt, I think it's very reasonable to say that Everett probably would have had like 60 catches for 600 yards. So he did have a career best year, but he didn't have the breakout year that maybe he was hoping for, because last year the cap went down, and I think a big reason why Everett took that 1 year, $6 million deal was he was thinking, okay, cap went down, I'm not going to get the bag, so I'm going to push it off until next year. Next year the cap goes back up, maybe I can get the bag then. So I think you are going to have to pay a little bit more this time around. But how much more? In order to understand that, in order to make some educated guesses, we got to take a look at some similar players who have recently signed contracts and basically just try to feel this out. But keep in mind that Everett did have, by a fairly small margin, a career year. Keep in mind that the cap went down last year and now it's gone way up. Keep in mind that he's probably looking for some long-term security now, which he did not have last season because of, like I said, I think he wanted to push that long-term commitment down the line a little bit. So keep that kind of stuff in mind as we start taking a look at some of these players. So what we have here are a list of tight end contracts in the NFL sorted by average annual value, because that's the main thing that we're going to be talking about here. What is the average annual value of the contract we would have to give Gerald Everett in order to keep him? So we're starting at the top. He's obviously no George Kittle. He's no Travis Kelce. He's no Dallas Goedert. Not a Mark Andrews. Jonnu Smith last year signed 4 years, $50 million, so $12.5 million a year. You're kind of getting close, right? Because Jonnu Smith, when he signed that contract, he was a couple years younger than Everett is now. And that being said, his stats were not jumping off the page. He also had never had a 500-yard season. He had never had a 50-reception season. The main difference here is that in 2020, Smith had a great year in the red zone. He had 8 touchdown catches, and he's also a premier tight end blocker, which Everett is not. Everett is an okay blocker, but he makes his money as a receiving tight end, somebody who can play, be a move tight end, somebody who can play receiver a little bit. Excuse me. So I don't think we're there yet, but we're not as far away as you would think. Okay, let's go back. Hunter Henry, the other New England tight end who signed a big deal last year, $12.5 million, same thing, 3 years, $37.5. Okay, age is, I mean, he's a little younger when he signed this deal. His numbers over the previous several seasons were better, so we're not there yet. We got to keep going. If you take a look at Hunter Henry's production over his last several years for the Chargers, it's bigger than Everett. So we're not quite there yet. Let's keep going. Austin Hooper, he signed a contract with the Browns a couple years ago for $10.5 million a year. And if you take a look at how he played to earn that contract, we're still not quite there. Still trying to find the actual match. You can see these last 2 years, he made the Pro Bowl. This last year, he had almost 700 yards, 6 touchdowns, 75 catches. So not quite there yet. Let's keep going. Zach Ertz, he signed this contract a while ago. We're not even going to consider it really. And Zach Ertz was a all-pro at that point, I think. Kyle Pitts, rookie deal, not really relevant to our interests. Logan Thomas. Okay, Logan Thomas. This is interesting. When Logan Thomas signed this contract last offseason, he was, I think, 28. 3 years, $24 million. Basically $8 million a year. So Logan Thomas, interesting career, by the way. He started at quarterback. Some of us will remember that because he was a Cardinal. But he signed this extension after a year where he had 72 catches for almost 700 yards and 6 touchdowns. But he hadn't really done that much before 2020. So it was one of those things where he was getting paid probably a little more than he deserved because he had a monster breakout year, but he had very little before then. So kind of an interesting comparison. The age is somewhat similar. Logan Thomas was a little older, but in this year, he definitely had more production than Gerald Everett ever had. He got targeted 110 times in 2020. Gerald Everett has never been targeted nearly that much in a season. So I think we are starting to get approximately in the right range here. And if you go back to the list, and Jimmy Graham, he's too old, not a good comparison. Rob Gronkowski, kind of the same thing. We know he's just coming to play with his buddy Brady over in Tampa Bay anyway. Darren Waller signed his a couple years ago, so I tried to not look too hard at that. Higbee also signed his a couple years ago. Jack Doyle, Cameron Brate signed his like 3 years ago. So if you skip over a couple of those guys, you end up at Nick Boyle, who signed a $6.5 million a year deal with the Ravens in the most recent offseason. And what Nick Boyle had done to earn that money, it's not quite up to Everett standards, right? It's not that far away. We have to remember he got hurt in 2020. 2019 was his best year. He had 30 catches, 321 yards, 2 touchdowns. But we've gone a little too far, right? We've gone past the point that Gerald Everett can be reasonably compared to these players. Clearly, if Nick Boyle last year was able to get $6.5 million a year, then this year, with the cap going up and with the year Everett just had, Everett should be able to get a little bit more than that. So I think we found the range somewhere above Boyle, but around or maybe even a little bit below Logan Thomas. Now, factoring in the consideration that the cap went up, that Everett is probably aware of the fact that his numbers were depressed a little bit by his circumstances, we do have to maybe boost it up a little bit. But the other thing is, the final consideration here is the state of the tight end market. It's kind of flooded. This is a list of upcoming free agent tight ends. It's a long list of fairly impressive guys. Dalton Schultz had 800 yards. There are some veterans too, and Dalton Schultz is really young. You also have veterans like Zach Ertz. You've got Tyler Conklin, only 26 years old, had almost 600 yards last year. CJ Uzoma is probably looking to get paid this offseason. Got guys like Evan Ingram who still have tantalizing talent but can't quite get there. David Njoku's interesting. Ricky Seals-Jones, Hayden Hurst, Mo Alley Cox. There are quite a few appealing tight ends, so it's kind of a buyer's market for tight ends right now, I would say. So you put all this together, and I think the contract that Gerald Everett can reasonably expect to be offered in free agency this offseason would be right about what Logan Thomas got, maybe a little bit less. So I'm going to say 3 years, $23 million. So that's what I would expect a Gerald Everett to get. And Everett is just short of that line as a player, I think, where he's guaranteed to get that. A Gerald Everett could slip through the cracks. Like, you could see every tight end hungry team just saying, okay, you know, somebody's going to get Schultz, somebody's going to get Conklin, somebody's going to get Uzoma, somebody's going to get Ricky Seals-Jones, somebody's going to get Ali Cox. And some, you know, it's possible that Everett is the guy who's just left standing there wondering where the money went. So it could end up being a little lower than that, but I am going to go with 3 years, $23 million. And the final part of that question would be, am I willing to pay him that to keep him in Seattle? The answer is yes. I like Everett. I think he's a good player. I think that if you bring him back, if you bring Wilson back, if you bring Waldron back, and Wilson plays a full season and Everett plays a full season, he could have like 700, 800 yards. Lockett's going to start slipping eventually because physically he's just looks a little worn down to me, I think. And I think that Everett could really be a guy who steps up to replace some of the Lockett production. It would not surprise me if Everett came back on a 3-year, $23 million deal and had a much better year in 2022. So that would be my guess. 3 years, $23 million for Everett. We'll see what it ends up being. Maybe he wants another 1-year deal because he feels like he underachieved and he wants to get that 1-year deal so he can get the bag next off season. I guess that's possible, but if I were him, I would definitely try to jump on that $23 million with, I don't know how much guaranteed. It would probably be like 12 or 13. And that's my thoughts on Gerald Everett. Let me know what you guys think down below. What do you think he's going to get? Would you be willing to give it to him? What is the price that you would be willing to pay to bring back Everett? I think I like him a little bit more than some of you guys, so some of you guys will probably not quite be agreeing with my take, but that's what I say. Let me know what you guys think down below. Peace out. Go Hawks. We're going to continue to take a look at other outgoing Seahawks free agents, but Everett seems like a good place to start to me.